Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to our new chess lesson. If you have been playing chess for a while now, you might have noticed that based on your experiences, chess positions are not always in your favor. Sometimes you have the advantage, and there are times that you find yourself stuck in a disadvantageous position. In this video, we'll talk about handling space disadvantage. But first, what does space mean in chess? Well, space means extra property. Extra property is favorable for this simple reason. The more space one possesses, the more room his pieces have to move about in. Just like in this position right here. It appears that White's pawns give him huge space advantage. Look at those pawns locked in and, clamping Black's territory, right? His knight on d6 is also as solid as steel over there. And overall, his pieces are more free and can easily maneuver to better squares. Black can't just recapture that knight because after c takes d6, the queen will be hanging and will be attacked rather, and this pawn on c6 will be hanging and will be a target and will be captured instantly. If Black moves his rook, for example, to e7 instead, okay, and to prevent the capture, White still has a lot of options to continue. His rooks are also more free to roam around and also choose a target file to operate. He could pile up the rooks on the d file right there and maintain a very strong grip on this entire d file. He could also play king to h2 and rook to g1 and have a massive kingside attack. In fact, another move that could be played by White is right away play g4 to force the opening of the file. In other words, White's space advantage give him the edge in this position. When it comes to space, there's also another definition that's often heard. Space means control of squares. So the player with more space is the one who controls more squares on the board, just like in this position. Now listen, but how do we deal with it if we fall in the wrong side of the board? How do we handle space disadvantage? I only have one simple tip. Listen, if you happen to be a defender, one who lacks space, listen, trade pieces. By actively seeking trades, you're getting rid of some of your opponent's active pieces, and you free up some squares that were limited by those enemy pieces. Eventually, you'll have your pieces freed up and become more active than before. Not to mention that this will make your position more playable, giving you the opportunity to equalize and even grab some advantage. Now, let us go back to this position. If you're playing Black, and we adapt this mindset of trading pieces since we lack space and the position is cramped in our side, the better way to play is actually knight to b8. Now, guarding the c6 pawn, because after that move knight b8, after guarding the c6 pawn, our plan is to capture the knight so that after c takes d6, this pawn right here, the c6 backward pawn, has enough support and will not fall afterwards, right? Now, wait, it does allow the, knight takes e8, right? Are we doing the right thing? Now, this is better actually for Black because we have eliminated a very strong piece in the middle of the board. Now, even to the point of sacrificing an exchange, we have to make our position better. Now, the resulting position, because after this knight takes rook and rook takes knight, the resulting position is still winning for White, of course. But Black's position is not worse. He only needs to find a way now to get his knight maneuvered into this d5 square and also guard this 7th rank as soon or as long as he can. In this next position, this is a middle game situation coming from a perk opening. Black is kind of lost here for having a limited space. In fact, in this position, White is only slightly better, apparently because of his space advantage. In order for Black to equalize, he needs to exchange some of white's pieces, especially those active ones, and even pawns to, grab some squares or control some squares. So the better way to continue is bishop to g4. Now, taking the bishop out first before playing knight to d7 next. That makes sense, right? After h3 by white, black needs to capture the knight on f3. Now, there's no point of retreating back to c8 or to d7 because it could create conflict in the next move of our development for the knight, right? And also, it would, make our bishop passive anyway. So after bishop takes f3, we can play knight d7. Now, there's no passive light square bishop somewhere, okay? So white plays bishop to b2, developing his bishop, and now we play f5, challenging white's central pawn. It is also an attempt to trade the e-pawn to open up the f-file for the rook. If white captures the pawn on f5, then there's no problem. It will be very good for black because knight takes f5 creates an opportunity for knight to be active and to have a potential outpost on d4. Now, if white would, ignore that pawn exchange in the middle and play something else, for example, rook to e1, then we could just develop our knight to f6 or to c5, right? So knight to c5 perhaps, and with this move, knight to c5, we can provoke the exchange of material or the exchange of pawn in the center. Because after, for example, queen to d2, and then after the exchange of material right there in the middle, we could play knight to f5, and still our knight is active. In fact, the next few moves, our queen will be more aggressive, moving to h4 at some point, and double our rooks here in the f5. So from the worst position that we have a while ago because of a limited space for black, after the exchange of some pieces and pawns, black's position is more playable than before. In this position, black appears to be thriving to equalize on space, just like in the previous position. His minor pieces lose some range and are restricted. If black to play, he should seek to trade pieces and even pawns to open up his position and free up his pieces. So the best and more logical way to continue for black is a5. The idea is to open up the a-file for the rook, right? To at least have this rook more active and have the opportunity to climb into the position of white or to the territory of white. Now, furthermore, if white captures the pawn on the a5 after b takes a5 and our rook recaptures, notice that this c5 square becomes free and available for our knight to jump into, and also challenges an exchange of this strong central knight right there. So this is going to be a good opportunity for black to equalize. If white rejects the idea and simply plays a3, black still wants to free up space, right? So he captures the pawn still with a takes b4 and a takes b4. And then knight e to f6, making the other knight active and seeking to exchange white's centralized active knight on e4. If white plays bishop to h3, looking at this weakness on the light square right there, what is black going to do next? After bishop to h3, we can play bishop to c8, still intending to challenge and exchange the light square bishop right there. Right? Now, bishop to e6. Now, knight takes e4 first. Of course, white needs to recapture that with knight takes e4, otherwise the queen on d2 will fall, and rook to f8. Black will then play knight to f6 at some point and exchange more pieces, this knight right there, and also this temporary weakness on the light square there by the white's e6 bishop will be gone soon, because after this move knight to e6, the light square bishop on c8 will confront this entire diagonal and exchange white's strong bishop. The resulting position will be fair and playable for black. Here, black's pieces are more active and gains a lot of space in the queen side. and kingside parts of the board. White plays f3 to challenge the g4 pawn and recapture it with the knight if there is an exchange that happens in there. Take note that knight to e2 is also a good option too. Now, rook to a to c8 has been played by black, and f takes g4, h takes g4, and knight to e2, challenging this knight right there because we lack space. We need to exchange pawns and pieces. Okay, another attempt to exchange that strong d4 knight. Then rook to c2, played by black. Rook takes c2, knight takes c2. The queen is attacked. It has to move somewhere. Queen to f2, and then rook to c8. What happens next is d4, queen to b6, pinning the queen. Of course, white can't just capture the pawn on e5. And then king to g1, and knight takes pawn. And after this move, the resulting position is a better for white. Now let us take a look on how you manage yourself to play in a cramped position. This is an actual game, okay? An actual game where white fights to equalize entering to the middle game. Black has a strong setup in the center of the board, and white needs to improve his position. If you happen to play white here, what do you think is the best way to proceed? You can pause the video and find your better way to improve your position as white. All right. Thank you for your answers. Now, since white lacks space, we have to trade pieces, right? This mindset leads us to play knight to b5. Okay, which actually happened in the game. If black ignores it, if he plays knight to c4, we could play knight to c7, fork on the rook and the bishop, and we'll capture this light square bishop on e6 afterwards. Now, so with any other move, for example, if for example rook f to c8 or knight e to c8, we'd still capture this knight on d6. Okay, but in the game, black captures the knight on b5. So after knight takes b5, queen takes b5, the game continues. Now, the bishop on c5 is hanging as well as the b7 pawn. So rook f to c8 has been played by black. Now b6 is useless because white could still play b4, and bishop has to go back to d6. Just bear with me, and this pawn will fall, right? So black chose to play rook f to c8. Now the game continues. b3, e4, knight to d4, bishop takes d4, and rook takes to d4, and rook takes c2. Now this was the idea of black to actually control the second rank. Okay, so bishop to b2, rook a to c8, and rook goes back to d1, knight to g6, rook d to c1. Now white attempts to exchange those active ones of black. Okay, now h5, queen to f1, h4, capture rook to c, or takes c2, rook takes c2, queen d1, threatening the rook. It needs to go back, of course, because if queen supports that with queen to c7, there is a queen h5 check, and this knight will fall. So this rook is going to c8. Now after rook to c1, and the game continues. Now white's position is more playable than before. From a cramped position, lack of space, now he even have this edge with a very strong b2 diagonal in there. Now, lastly, I want to submit that carelessly trading pieces in a less spacious position is a different issue. Normally, we seek to trade pieces only if the resulting position is going to free up some space and improve our overall position. If not, then we may need to consider being patient and continue to keep our pieces as active as possible, maneuvering, keeping an eye to the enemy plans to penetrate even more.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.